with the Sui Foundation. And so we're going to do two things. I'm going to use 3 slides, so it'll be a very short slide deck. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our security program and the methodology that we use to build it. And then I'm going to go through an example of how we used Merkle's tool to do an investigation on a hack that took place earlier this year of a protocol on Sui. Sound good? Cool. Okay, so vision and approach, right? My goal in the security program is to have it be the industry benchmark for layer 1 security program capabilities. We are not as well funded, right, as Ethereum. I think recently they came out with their $1 trillion security initiative. The one I released last month was $10 million, so like not as big. But that's the objective, and I want to be able to provide tooling and have frameworks in place for the protocols on Sui to use. I am a big fan of organization and structure, and so we created 6 major categories of security capabilities that we offer to our ecosystem teams. So end user threat prevention, right? That's something like in the wallet that protects the users from interacting with a scam. Investigative capabilities, that would be your Merkle or your elliptic tools that we have deployed on chain. For real-time threat monitoring or real-time monitoring and response, we have things like blockade and hypernative and guardrail that enable contract integrations such that after threat modeling takes place, alerts will trigger and be sent not only to the protocol itself, but also to us so that we can maintain an awareness of their posture from a security standpoint. We do operational process review with these teams. Some of this is internally derived and resourced. Some of it is vendor funded, right? But we train teams on here's how you do incident response, here's how you do alert development and threat modeling. We have a wide variety of audits that take place, so that's the vulnerability discovery. And then for contract development standards, that's where I spoke earlier about giving the checklist to different teams. And we also have, and this is again something we announced last month, a program with Open Zeppelin where they are going to develop contract libraries for us. So take like a maths library of a DeFi protocol, for example, rather than 10 people writing those and some of them having vulnerabilities, there's going to be one known good source that people are able to use to develop whatever tool or protocol they'd like. And the objective there, right, is less vulnerabilities in the core application. So I'm going to talk through an example, like I said. So earlier this year, Cetus, which is a DeFi platform on Sui, experienced a hack of their DeFi protocol, and $220 million was stolen from them. They contacted us. They led the investigation. It was their investigation. We supported their investigation as necessary. And through existing processes and the communication we had with them, we were actually able to lock 75% of the stolen funds, so about $160 million, and later get that back, and I'll talk through that. And then, unfortunately, $60 million went out to Ethereum, and we haven't been able to get that back. But we did work with Cetus to figure out how to make all the users whole that had money stolen from them, because this money wasn't actually Cetus's money, right? It's money of users who are putting their money into the Cetus DeFi protocol. Okay, so that is the last slide. Okay. It actually, I was afraid it would look real small, but the big screen is nice. So I'm going to come up here if that's all right. Okay. So this icon represents the Cetus contract, right, on top. And so we have the flow that represents in this case, it's represented as 215 million, but this is the 200 million that was stolen by the threat actor. What we found using this tool is the actor consolidated all of the money into one address on chain, which ended up working to their detriment. And they moved a portion of it, about 90 million, out to what we would call actor wallet 2 on Sui. They immediately began bridging money through 4 different bridges. And you can see the amounts are different, right? So on the right-hand side, that's the value that was moved through that bridge to Ethereum. And I'll show you, like I have a screenshot just to demonstrate it, but we know that the bridging was scripted because every 30 seconds, the actor is moving a $999,000, which is, you know, a little below the limit of wormholes delay mechanism kicking in. So every 30 seconds, you know, almost $1 million was flowing out. And so they used those different bridges to move the money. Initially, it was all the money went into the one Ethereum wallet, which is over here, kind of this one. And the majority of the money was then sent to what we would call Actor Wallet 2 on Ethereum. And there's about 50 million that was sent over. All the money that was stolen sat in those 2 wallets for a good period of time. Recently, June, I guess in June, the actor started moving some of that money through Tornado Cash. And I was actually surprised only 100 ETH went out through that mechanism. I was expecting to see more or more continuous flows, but that was the only one we've seen. So using this tool and other tools, we're able to fairly quickly build this picture. Some of the panels earlier talked about, hey, like tracing is great, but it doesn't help me get the 60 million back that was stolen, right? So we worked, and I'll go back kind of to the machine here, but we worked with different partners to see if there was a way to freeze any of those funds. And Wormhole was able to help us with sort of the last transaction, the last bridge transaction, and they were able to delay that enough so that Circle could lock those USDC. What I haven't talked about is what we did with this 160 million that was locked right in the actor's wallet. There is a capability on Sui that was utilized where the validators can add an address to their configuration file and effectively whitelist, or ignore transactions from certain addresses. And so by doing that, the actor is no longer able to approve transactions or send any more money or move that money out anywhere else. And so the funds were then kind of stuck in this wallet. And this is all of these activities took place and they were community driven, right? The community voted on whether or not to push these out, and the validators had the option to add this address or these addresses to their ignore list. And then we rolled out basically an upgrade into the core protocol itself that allowed, again, with community voting, to make the decision about whether or not to do it, that allowed the money to get returned back to Cetus. And of course, back ultimately to the users. So the 160 went back to Cetus, not immediately, right, but ended up back there. And then the remaining 60, it's still on ETH. We have nothing we can do about it really right now. And the users were made whole through Cetus's, Cetus and the Sui Foundation contributed to making sure all the users were made whole. But yeah, that's just one example of an attack that we investigated.
What was the time frame regarding the configurations?
Right, so I'd have to go back and look at it. I'm in the US, right? So the timestamps on here, I think 10:30 a.m. UTC was the first, the actual exploit transaction taking place, which for me was 5:30 in the morning. So we have detection capabilities that not only look on chain, but also look at things like social media. And that detection mechanism triggered an on-call PagerDuty is what we use, but an on-call tool so that it effectively woke up. I was on call, so it woke me up and had us start investigating. And so we reach out to Cetus and we work with them. By the time the hack took place, there were a number of transactions because the hack affected liquidity pools, so it drained multiple liquidity pools. but it was all scripted, right? So it took maybe less than a minute or two, right, to drain all those liquidity pools. The bridging started very quickly after that, right, within a number of minutes. And so I forget the exact time, but maybe an hour or 2 hours, we were able to coordinate with the validators so that they could make the decision about whether they wanted to ignore the transactions, future transactions.
Sorry, just one question. Did you say that the USDC was on the ETH address was effectively locked and blacklisted by USDC? And if so, do they have the ability? So I know that they do have the ability to obviously burn the tokens and then potentially remint them for victims, but they've not ever done it yet. And so this seems like a pretty good use case to try and persuade them.
It does, and we can talk more about that probably after.
Okay. Sorry. So the attack was one word. If everything was scripted, then I would say the hacker must have tested the scripts before somehow.
Yep.
Both the exploit, because he must be 100% sure that the exploit is going to work if he had scripts prepared for wormhole.
Mm-hmm.
Did you track the identical transactions? Maybe he used some other addresses on which he was testing? Was it testnet?
That was part of the investigation, yeah. And we did find them. But the other thing is you can actually run the protocol on your own local machine and run your own validator, right? So you can test it in your own environment and it never actually goes out to the chain. So what we saw was one initial transaction that failed, followed by all the transactions that didn't fail. So presumably there was a lot of testing that went in before the one transaction that failed.
Thank you so much, yes.
And Ian, I know you have part of this you want to talk through too, but one more.
It might be a stupid question, but transactions on the blockchain are supposed to be immutable. You mentioned how the validator basically chose to ignore the transaction, the bad actors' transactions. I mean, it's a good thing, really, but doesn't that pose a question as to whether Sui or the validators can basically ignore transactions from good actors in the future, or
Sorry, go ahead.
if you follow what I'm trying to say, where it's supposed to be immutable, but yet it's not.
So yeah, so to be clear, we didn't undo any transactions through that process. We prevented additional future transactions. The validators are the ones that vote on whether or not to ignore an address. And so in theory, yes, it's possible, but it would take this large group of people to make a decision like that. It's probably a good time to switch because I'm losing my voice.
Happy to take over, and I'm happy to elaborate a little. Where is it going? Can we identify it based on certain lists that we maintain? Can we enhance that by monitoring the behavior of addresses? But one of the things that really attracted me to blockchain in the early days was the fact that it's really changing the way that analytics for transactions are being done, right? In the traditional world, analytics is usually restricted to the data that you have, which is the information that your organization might see, because you have no idea how funds are moving beyond it. But with blockchain, all of that changes, right? Because we're not restricted to just looking at the transactions of one address. We can actually perform analysis at a blockchain layer, right? Which means that we can simultaneously analyze how businesses are moving their funds and how tokens are being utilized across blockchains. So in as early as 2020, here at Merkle, we've actually designed 2 macro-level monitoring tools, which I had hoped the market would be interested in. Sadly, I was wrong. The first tool that we developed was something called KYBB, Know Your Blockchain Business. So before I joined Merkle, I actually started my career as a capital markets lawyer, having studied here in London. And as a capital markets lawyer, one of the things that we always did was due diligence, right? We used to pay firms obscene amounts of money in order to do due diligence on companies to assess their risk. And I thought to myself, you know what? Why don't we have something similar for crypto, right? And today, yes, there's a lot of KYB companies that would give you a KYB risk assessment on crypto businesses, but they still mainly focus on traditional risk factors. Whereas with blockchain, we actually have the ability to analyze the transaction behavior of a crypto entity, right? So by that, I mean the ability to, let's say, look up an exchange like OKX and immediately be able to see how many addresses does OKX control, what's their current balance, what's their transaction inflow and outflow look like, how are they distributing their holdings across the different blockchains and tokens that they support, who their top traded counterparties are, and more importantly, from a risk and compliance perspective, are they doing any transactions with sanctioned addresses, right? All that information is actually already online. So we developed the tool, and then the bear market hit, and nobody's kind of interested in doing risk assessment on crypto businesses because crypto businesses were not very popular. Today, thankfully, the market is picking up, and we are seeing revived interest in such tools. So I'm very happy to share one with you. The other tool that we had built was a token monitoring dashboard, right? So similarly, like how we can aggregate the analysis of a crypto exchange activity, we can also perform analysis of a token at a blockchain level. Right? So for example, for those of you who are looking to deal with USDC, wouldn't it be useful if you could actually show your compliance team how many addresses are holding USDC, and more importantly, what percentage of USDC's transaction volume involve, let's say, an illicit actor? Right? Wouldn't it be useful to have access to this information when you're trying to decide, should I onboard USDC or USDT? Right? All this information is actually available. And having all this data is good, but one of the problems that the industry had historically faced was, how can we make this data actionable, right? Because we can tell issuers that, hey, your tokens are bad, but can the issuers actually do anything about it? And so to answer some of the questions or discussions that came about in the previous presentation, actually a lot of tokens today, they actually have built-in compliance in their smart contract, right? They actually have the ability to rewind transactions. They have the ability to freeze wallets. These projects just don't talk about it. Why? Because it's not popular, right? If they were to go out into the blockchain industry and say, hey, we have the ability to freeze your transactions, nobody's going to like their token. But if you look at the code of a lot of these token projects, actually there are such safeguards built in. And in fact, a lot of the new stablecoin projects today, when they issue their token, they do have built-in compliance because it's slowly becoming an expectation by regulators. In Singapore, where I'm based, one of the reasons why we had developed this was actually to help one of our local stablecoin issuers demonstrate to their regulators that they have monitoring capabilities in place, and they actually have actionable data that they can use to freeze wallets and rewind transactions. And today, we're also very excited to start working with more protocols because we're also seeing interest from protocols directly, like Sui, to have such monitoring capabilities used to monitor their network, so that if they want to work with institutions, they can demonstrate to institutions that, hey, we have compliance as one of our forefront considerations. We have the data necessary to analyze if bad actors are using our tokens, and we have the ability to freeze and rewind transactions where necessary. But I do agree, this power must be exercised very carefully because it can erode trust with your users. Right? But that being said, I do believe that there is a way to kind of balance the both, where we can have the best of a autonomous platform that people can track, but at the same time balance that with the need to catch bad guys, essentially. And so one of the things that we also are able to do, after sitting down with the Sui Foundation and taking a look at how the hack was actually orchestrated, we were then able to come up with a set of behavior indicators that we could then use to monitor their wallets. right? So future projects looking to build on Sui can actually have Merkle monitor their liquidity pools, and we can provide real-time alerts if, let's say, suddenly one of the liquidity pools or treasury has its balance fall more than 50% within a short period, right? All of this can be indicators of an attack on a business. And I think the evolution of this, where the alerts come in after the transaction happens, will be to be monitoring these transactions at a mempool level, right? Because if you can see somebody trying to initiate a transaction to drain a treasury, then potentially there is the option for the protocol or the token controller to front run a transaction to move the assets out of the wallet before it is stolen. So in conclusion, I think blockchain analytics is evolving. I think it's a very exciting space. You know, we shouldn't be restricted to trying to do transaction monitoring the way that we've been doing for cash and crypto. We should embrace the fact that crypto is actually providing us with so much more data, and the type of monitoring that we do should extend beyond just our business, but at an ecosystem level, right? Because only then can we do effective policing. Yeah. And with that, I come to the end of my presentation. Thank you, everyone, and I'll invite the next panel on after me.